Hi, everyone. Um, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the coronavirus crisis and our Constitution. Take a little bit of a break from women's suffrage. Don't worry, we'll come back to it. But I thought it was important to kind of talk about federalism and how we are seeing examples of it happening right now in the news. If you remember, we did an activity earlier where we had to find examples of federalism in the news. And what's happening right now in our country really is an example of federalism being really tested. So if you remember, federalism is the division of power between the state governments and the federal government. And the Constitution outlines, which powers are for the federal government and which are for the states. And when it's not clear, those powers are for the states. So in the question I want you to think about is, how should the government respond? And when I'm talking about the government, I mean both the states and the federal government respond to a crisis situation like we're facing right now with the pandemic. So, should it be the states or the federal government? Here are the parts of the Constitution that are involved that we've talked about so far. Article 1, Congress shall have the power to, and if you've been following along in the news, Congress has passed a number of stimulus bills and economic packages to help relieve businesses and individuals who aren't working during this pandemic. And then Article 2, which is the presidency, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States, meaning it's the president's job to carry out all of the laws. Now, there isn't anything specific in the Constitution about what to do in case of a health disaster, but there are federal agencies, 87 of them to be exact, that are responding to the COVID-19 crisis, particularly the Centers for Disease Control, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and then the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, which is Dr. Fauci, who's been on the news. Now, these agencies are trying to have a coordinated response. On the other hand, you have the 10th Amendment, which says that the powers that aren't delegated to the United States, so anything that's not particularly stated in Article 1, which there's not a lot in there, they are reserved for the states. So that's where we're talking about the governors and the state boards of health and how individual states are responding to this. And that's where you get to see some of the tensions playing out between the federal government and the states. So the question you're going to answer after you listen to some people who are wiser than I am talk about this is that in this time of crisis, how should the federal government respond? Should the federal government intervene and there be a national plan or a national response that all of the states have to do the same thing? Or should the decisions about how to handle this pandemic be left to the individual states? So what you're going to do is you're going to listen to a podcast called The Daily, and they're talking about the role of governors. And in this, they're talking about the role of governors versus the role of the presidency. I also attached to you an article from Actively Learn. There are no questions on there, but if you read it, there is some valuable information about federalism and the pandemic. All right, guys, it was good to chat, or at least you get to hear my voice. And I look forward to hearing what you have to say. All right, talk to you soon.